Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, and esteemed and honorable guests joining us from across the Gulf region, Arab world, and internationally for the Forum on the State of Affairs of Corporate Governance in the Gulf region. My name is Rania Saadawi, and I am the Executive Director at the Pearl Initiative and your hostess and MC for today's unique forum. We have an exciting lineup of distinguished speakers and fireside chats covering a range of topics related to improving corporate governance, accountability, and transparency in the private sector, featuring 15 distinguished leaders from Pearl Initiative's key corporate partners, government allies, and civil society organizations, including the Ministry of Youth and Sports Affairs in Bahrain, Careem, STC, Nesma Holding, the World Economic Forum, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Basel Institute on Governance, Tharawat, Meta and Facebook, talabat, Letswork, just to name a few. For our esteemed audience, we encourage you to use the chat function to share your reactions, questions, and thoughts of the conversations through today's forum over the next 2.5 hours. This is an opportunity to hear your feedback, but also to hear from you about different ways to get involved in the Gulf regional and international movement towards collective action on corporate governance. Throughout today's forum, we will be polling the audience to get your opinion and understand what you're doing in your organization. We encourage you to participate in the polls, of which the answers are anonymous. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Pearl Initiative's Chairman of the Board of Governors and the Managing Partner of KPMG Bahrain for his introductory remarks. Welcome, Mr. Jubaili Bros. Jamal, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Your Excellency, our distinguished speakers, Pearl Initiative's teamed corporate and program partners, and to our guests today joining from around the world, a very warm welcome to all of you for joining us this unique forum on the state of affairs of corporate governance in the Gulf region. This forum also marks the Pearl Initiative celebration of its 10th years anniversary journey and the journey of the collective business community in the Gulf region in achieving economic and sustainable business growth. As we know, the year 2020 and 2021 has been largely marked by the COVID-19 pandemic. This has certainly posed significant challenges, disruption, and uncertainty for governments, businesses, communities, and society in large. These past few years also highlighted that corporate stewardship and environment, social, and governance principle ESG are not ornamental, but are rather fundamental to the resilience and prosperity of our business and the future generation. It is from this belief that business leaders from across the Gulf region formed the Pearl Initiative in 2010. The mission and continue to be the leading Gulf non-profit organization founded by businesses for business in the Gulf region to collectively embrace and promote higher standards in corporate governance, accountability, and transparency to enhance the business innovation, opportunity, and value creation. Our fellow Board of Governors, corporate partners, and myself have fundamentally believed that the individual components of ESG are not mutually exclusive, but rather interlinked. While environmental and social goals are two sides of the same coin, The governance dimension is the edge of that coin, which binds everything together. Strong corporate governance, it creates the foundation upon which a business agenda of environmental and social sustainability and corporate stewardship can be built. The Pearl Initiative's achievement are thanks to the support and patronage of our founders, board of governors, our corporate programmatic and ecosystem partners. Together with your support, active contribution, and your individual and collective action, we continue to contribute to building the thriving economy in the Gulf region that embrace governance, accountability, and transparency as key pillars of sustainability growth. Please join us for a video presentation of the Pearl Initiative over 10 years journey in collaboration with over 40 regional and international partners to make the businesses case of corporate governance actors across the Gulf region.
Connecting leaders from across all sectors to address these very challenges, we aim to collectively design self-renewing models of collaborative governance that will ensure the vitality of the region's economies and societies for generations to come.
The youth are the future workforce. They are the future leaders for the businesses that fuel the growth of the region.
It is a privilege to be working with the Pearl Initiative in promoting higher governance standards, something for which there is a clear regional need for.
For our businesses, for our community, the more we engage the youth, the students at universities, the youth in their businesses, entrepreneurs, that is the area I think we should focus going forward.
You know, the Pearl Initiative started at a time where there was very little information about governance and very little even direction towards governance. And in the past 10 years, this has changed. The momentum is growing daily. And I would just say we need to continue what we're doing. We need to increase the way we are showing how transparency can be beneficial.
I look forward to working with all of you and welcoming the new partners as we continue the journey in the next 10 years and beyond. Today's forum is a reflection of how far the corporate governance conversation has moved in the Gulf region, but also forward-looking towards actionable steps and the ongoing journey in improving the private sector in partnership with governments and international organizations. Back to you, Rania.
Thank you to our esteemed board chairman, Jamal. Jamal will be joining us shortly for a conversation with His Excellency Ayman Al-Muayyad, the Minister of Youth and Sports in Bahrain. In the meantime, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Marie-Estelle Ray from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Since 1999, the OECD has developed what has become the standard international benchmark for corporate governance. Since 1999, and endorsed by G20 leaders and the World Bank since the mid-2000s, the OECD's Corporate Governance Division helps policymakers and private sector leaders alike evaluate and improve the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for corporate governance. Please join me for this fireside chat with Marie, who will discuss the global tides and changes in corporate governance with a focus on managing ESG risks and highlighting the key principles of corporate governance as issued by OECD for 2022 and beyond. Marie, over to you.
Many thanks, Rania. Good afternoon to all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be joining you today for this very important conference. As Rania said, the OECD has developed some principles of corporate governance. We call them the G20 OECD principles on corporate governance because they have also been endorsed by the G20. They have been issued in 1999 and they've been revised in 2015. And now we are engaging into a new review of the principles, especially in light of what we have been living in the last 2 years, as you all know, is the COVID-19 crisis. So the principle, they cover 6 main pillars, is of course the general governance, corporate governance framework, but we touch upon also the right of shareholders, the role of stakeholders, the issue of institutional investors and stock market, of course, also disclosure and transparency. And we have a last section on the responsibility of the boards. So we have been looking, studying, analyzing in the OECD, what is the impact of the crisis on corporate governance and capital markets. We have some few key messages that derive from our analysis, and I would like to develop them. There's 3 points that I would like to develop now. The first point is how to make equity markets support the recovery and long-term resilience. Of course, we all know that the recapitalization of companies is vital, not only before, but much more now. And the road to recoveries is requiring very well-functioning equity markets to be able to allocate sustainable finance resource for long-term investments in various sectors, including the green sectors, I would say. Today, we have more than 40,000 listed companies in the world, but since 2005, we have noted a delisting trend. So that means that more than 30,000 companies have delisted from stock market globally. This one was mainly in the US and in Europe, but which is not the case in Asia. Asia stayed a very dynamic capital market. But what does that say us? This kind of delisting trend is that the delisting has not been matched with new listing. So that means there's a decline in listing from smaller companies, which now have much more difficulties in accessing public equity financing. However, our research has shown that there is, during the COVID-19, a record equity issuance of more than $1 trillion US. So that's also good news that there's some funds, that are available. And that's also this equity markets can still serve, households, because equity is the largest asset class available to households. So this is why it's very important for governments and policymakers to make sure that corporate governance policies can protect savers across border. My second message relates to the adaptation of the corporate governance framework in light of the crisis. Again, we've noticed, in our analysis, a real global increase in ownership concentration. In some markets, which is the case of the Gulf and MENA countries, there's a dominance of companies group structure. We have also noted, the rise of institutional investors in equity markets, and also the role of government as a very important ownership. So this kind of concentration is also something that would prevent smaller growth companies to also access equity markets due to this increased concentration. But this has led also to a special attention to the kind of inadequacies in national disclosure frameworks related to capital and control structures. We also all noted, just back here, we also all noted that there's a real call, from the crisis to improve the risk and crisis management for all companies. It includes, of course, risk on health, supply chain, reputation, environment, and you know them and we can name them. And this, I want to flag the issue of the use of digital technology, which can be a very useful tool to really monitor and disclose the risk associated to the crisis and to the functioning of the companies. But it also raised the issue of cybersecurity. As managers of companies, you've all noticed that, with the teleworking, a remote participation in meetings, even in general assemblies, this can cause some cybersecurity issues that we need to also think of. There has been also a link to the COVID-19 outbreaks, some concerns that companies have kind of manipulated executive remuneration and bonus, and this has led to a renewed scrutiny on the conditions and the procedures for deciding and overseeing performance-related pay. And the trend also today is also to link, the performance and the pay to also ESG factors. We'll come back to that afterwards. Other issues that we have noted, is the issue of debt holder rights. This means that, some companies has been in financial distress during the crisis. And government needs to really now think about how they can support the restructuring of viable companies, but also for non-viable companies, how to support them in the process of this insolvency, structure and framework for them. So there's a need to really adapt the insolvency framework also as we go out of the crisis. The issue of diversity also, you all know about it, they need to really have boards and managements more diverse and better access to for women to the leadership positions in companies. This is something that is also important. And then of course, ESG, but we'll come back to that in the next slides. But what I want to tell you here is that it's these adaptations, are very important for boards. They need to be very reactive to make sure that they grasp all these new trends and be ready, for the future in adapting, their functioning. So let's turn now to ESG. How to improve the management of ESG risk. Now we have 165 jurisdictions have presented their national plan to reduce greenhouse gas emission in line of the Paris Agreement, but this really still falls short to reduce, the combined emission reduction to the target that we have, which is 1.5 degree, increase growth, by 2030 compared to the post-industrial levels. So what does that create, for investors and shareholders? Now, a growing number of investors would like to really consider climate and in general ESG risk when they are making their investments, when they are engaging into a business. It's very important to know that company needs to be really aware about this really new trends. On the shareholder side, they are now more and more exercising their rights on ESG and climate related issues. For example, they've been filing resolution for the adoption of reduction targets. They've been trying to nominate directors with kind of an ESG sensitivity or with the goal to move the company strategy towards lower carbon footprint. And another trend also is the litigation. There has been much more litigation in the recent months and 2 years, you know, on the grounds of inadequate management of climate risk. So what we should be doing, you know, to really improve, you know, this management of ESG risk. So in terms of the companies, they really need to develop expertise, information channels, analytical tools, policies, and practice to really assess their ESG risk factors. The boards on themselves, you know, they need to really demonstrate their leadership. The tone should come from the top, you know, to ensure an effective means of ESG risk oversight. They need also to establish very clear lines of responsibility and accountability all along, you know, the supply chain. So that means within the company, but also with their subsidiaries. In terms of policymakers and regulators, they need to facilitate the development of comprehensive ESG frameworks because they need to help companies to be able to monitor and disclose ESG risk. And they need also to help them to produce, you know, kind of consistent, comparable, and reliable climate-related disclosures. And this is why now in the next slide, you will see the kind of plenitude of frameworks and standards that exist today, you know, to disclose information on climate-related and other ESG performance, risk, and strategy. I don't want to go into details of this table, but it's just to show you the type of different institutions and systems that exist, you know. I think you've all heard about TCFD, you know, the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure, or the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, or again, the Integrated Reporting Framework Board, or the initiative of the IFRS Foundation, you know, it's the International Financial Reporting Standards. All this, you know, is like a multiplicity of standards that companies need to deal with. And this is where, you know, there's possibly some hope, you know, in trying to combine all this. But I would like to give back the floor to Rania to dig a bit more into this issue, you know, of all the standards and framework in light of the COPs that has been taking place.
Thank you so much, Marie. And building on that, you know, was there any kind of global ESG standards and business community commitments that were expected from COP26 or were outlined? And how can the private sector community and executive leadership take this forward towards COP28?
Yeah, thank you, Rania. Yeah, thank you for this question, because it really leads me to an important initiative that was launched during the COP26. Of course, people need to understand that the Paris Agreement is really what is the target. You know, when all governments, you know, committed to a certain level of growth in gas emission. But the COP26, for our purpose today, has a very important outcome that still need to be seen, you know, on the functioning of that, is the announcement of the creation of the International Sustainability Standard Board. This is a board that has been announced by the FRS Foundation at the COP26, and this new institution, ISSB, as called as an acronym, is as the objective to deliver like comprehensive global baseline of sustainability related disclosure standards. That could help, you know, the companies to have a clearer vision of what they need to disclose. And why they need to disclose that is really to provide all the investors and the capital market participants with information on companies' risk and opportunity to make sure that the investors can take the right decisions. So this is a very important initiative the board is now set up. They have all the staff and directors on that. But there's a lot of challenges also that are linked, to this board. They're supposed to come up by June, with already some preliminary kind of standards on that. But of course, the issue of the cooperation between all the different institutions, the acceptance by global acceptance, but also, and this is the last message I want to make, is also the transformation of these ESG standards into national legislation. Thank you, Rania.
Thank you, Marie, as well. And how, going forward, can executive leadership and private sector further drive ESG and corporate governance structures and support OECD and national governments on this agenda? What are one or two key top priorities that our community should consider?
Well, I would have flagged two important things for companies. The management needs to be committed and involved. They need to be changing the culture. They need to develop the skills, to train their staff, to really set the tone from the top, as I said before. There is also a director's duties, in kind of balancing the shareholders and the stakeholders, rights and interests. This is what we call a bit in our jargon, the combination between the shareholder primacy and the stakeholder capitalism. So that's very important issues. And just to conclude, what I want to show you in the last slide that you just showed was the key priorities for the review of the G20 OECD principles on corporate governance, on which we are really heavily working at the moment, where we want to address a number of issues. And I think also executive leaders need to have this broad vision of where we stand today, what are the topics that need to be really addressed, to best understand and grasp the very important issues. And one last point I want to make also from the OECD, as we are engaging into this review of the principles, it's very important for us to have a very inclusive approach. So this is what my message, and I'm very happy to be speaking today, because what you are doing in the Pearl Initiative and through this conference, is to build awareness on all the standards of what leadership needs to be doing. And it's also a call from the OECD to really get engaged also in what we're doing. We will be trying to really being very inclusive, and also to have a meeting, a roundtable, for the MENA region on corporate governance and the review of those principles, because we want to hear policymakers, stock markets, regulators, but also, companies and entrepreneurs. So thank you very much, Rania. I'll give you back the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marie, and thank you for OECD. And on your note of inclusivity and getting national governments involved, it is my honor to return it back to our chairman, Jamal Fakhro, who will welcome His Excellency Ayman Al-Muayyad, the Minister of Youth and Sports in Bahrain, on the inclusivity of bringing in the incoming workforce and the next generation workforce into this important discussion. Mr. Jamal?
Thank you very much, Rania, and thank you, Marie, for an excellent presentation. It was very informative and very useful, although for people at my age and at my level. So thank you very much for that. Good afternoon, Your Excellency Ayman. Good to have you with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome His Excellency Ayman Tawfiq Al-Muayyad, Minister of Youth and Sports in Bahrain, to share his perspective and expertise around Gulf regions, next generation, and incoming workforce. His Excellency currently serves on a number of government boards and committees, including chairmanship of the Education and the Training Quality Authority, chairman of the Bahrain's Hub Funds Board of Directors. This fund was created only 2 years ago, and I think His Excellency have done a great job on that, and maybe he can share some of his ideas on the development of the fund. And also His Excellency is a member of the Bahrain Supreme Council of Youth and Sport, the Supreme Council of Health, the Supreme Council of Education, and the Ministerial Committee of Legal Affairs. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time and joining me today to discuss programs and initiatives that the government of Bahrain and governments enlarged in the GCC can partner on, along with the private sector community, to support future young business leaders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the Pearl Initiative and all of our friends within key managements within Pearl Initiatives for, number one, the outstanding leadership in the sector, and also number two, for thinking outside the box with regards to strategic partnerships. So we're very glad about our partnership, and we're very glad to learn from Pearl Initiative and yourselves where we can govern better and more efficiently. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Excellency. Before I start my question, let's agree. What do you mean, or how do you define youth in terms of age, specifically, and in terms of participation? Good.
So this is a conversation that the Cabinet had back in 2018. It is a very important conversation. Different jurisdictions address youth in different ways. Some jurisdictions talk about the age of 14 to 25. Other jurisdictions go further. The benchmark, the international benchmark with regards to this, really comes out of Japan. What Japan tries to look at is a holistic development of the individual or of the citizen. And therefore, what they try to figure out is it's a soft sort of parameter between the age of 0 and the age of, so 0 birth and the age of 40. That's in Japan. We were under the impression that 40 might be too late, but we understand the logic of the Japanese, because they were of the assumption that elements that currently apply to this particular age bracket will also apply with the age bracket between 35 and 40. And so for Bahrain's context, every country has its own context, but for Bahrain's context, we were looking from birth up to the age of 35. That's the youth full segment that we're referring to.
Okay, well, thanks. This is clear, and I know, as you said, every country, every region, every organization even define the age of youth. As a parliamentarian, I can tell you that in the International Parliamentary Union, they define the age of youth up to the age of 45. So that is again another different age. And I saw on WhatsApp that they define the age of youth up to 65. But now you have disappointed us, all of us, the old generation here, Ayman. Ayman, let me take you to listen to your views. What practices does your ministry use to empower youth to become effective leaders? We are talking about the future, and we believe your ministry and other ministries in the region have a role to do on that. So maybe you can share with us what do you do at the ministry, and if you know of other ministries in the region, what they are doing.
Yes, absolutely. So what we do with regards to empowerment and engagement is the following. The first thing that we did with regards to the Ministry of Youth, also from a governance perspective, was we needed to know what our due north is, or a North Star, if you will. And so we needed to have performance indicators so that we understand what exactly is it, what services are we providing, and what's our purpose of existence, what's our raison d'etre. And so what we did was we identified the following. The aspirational goal is as follows. We understand from international academic studies that a hopeful community becomes a productive community very, very quickly. And the inverse is correct. And so, interestingly enough, the mandate of the Ministry of Youth was very, very simply to synthesize and grow hope. Okay? And so, sounds very good, sounds very romantic. Now we need to turn it into operational excellence and make sure that we have KPIs. And so, to do that, The second bit that we did was we created dashboards that most of our ministry members, most of cabinet have access to and get updates on, that show whether our youth, so 0 to 35, feel safe, seen, supported, wanted, trusted, hopeful. So this is the mechanism that was created based on our observations, and it was designed internally. So quite literally, there are dashboards in every sense of the word that through surveys show us what the perception on the ground looks like. And the reason I say this is because in preparing your youth, in preparing your labor force, preparing your graduates, preparing leaders of the future, I think one of the most important things that you need to address, and one of the most important things that many countries forget to address, is perception versus reality. And I'll tell you why we say that. There's a huge difference between the perception of feeling safe versus the reality of feeling safe. In most countries, if you statistically look at the numbers, individuals are safer than they perceive themselves to be. So the reality is safer than the perception. And so it's very important for us from a communication perspective to, again, focus on perception and ensure that individuals feel safe, seen, supported, wanted, trusted, hopeful. That's the soft element that we focus. The second bit that we need to ensure is the availability of opportunities. To be quite frank, when we looked at developed countries, countries that are also of a similar size, we've looked at the Singaporean model, we've looked at even the Estonian model, we've looked at a lot of Western models as well, and what we've noticed there. That we have had shortcomings in, I would say, in our jurisdictions and region, was that there they play to strengths. And what do I mean by that? I mean, they very early on, individuals, most young professionals, have their IQ tests, their psychometric tests, they've got career counseling and so on and so forth, to ensure that they understand what sort of role would they naturally be well accustomed to flourish in. Okay, that's not something that we had done or focused on, at least locally. And so what we have tried to do was the kingdom has created an institution called Skills Bahrain, which is going live very, very quickly now. Before second quarter of this year should be fully live. And so what Skills Bahrain does is effectively teaches the individual to identify their skill sets. Interestingly enough, when you look at developed countries, a lot of them know their psychometric readings by heart. They know their IQs by heart. They know where they would fit very, very quickly. So number one, we needed individuals to know their own strengths. Number two, we needed access to opportunities. I'm very glad to report that if you walk into any convenience store in Bahrain, and if you open any newspaper or do so online, if you will find at the very least 2 full pages of job opportunities that are available in Bahrain with their requirements and so on and so forth. And so the second issue that we had was access to information, access to opportunities. And so what we did was that we centralized that. This is being published readily and it's available to the community for them to be able to apply. So if they know what their strengths are and they know what is available in the market, they can very quickly bridge between the two. The last bit that I'll also add is that we had a huge problem, and this is we see this around the world. We have a huge signaling problem, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Internationally, the signaling problem is as follows. Somebody graduates from a particular university with a particular qualification, becomes very successful very quickly. What you would then see is that you would have endless numbers of individuals that imitate and go into that same profession or that same academic specialization. And so We'd have years where we have excess in law graduates. We have years that we have excess in finance graduates. And then we have years where we have excess and so on. So what usually happens, oddly enough, but this happens internationally, is that you would end up with oversupply for limited demand, okay? And then undersupply for other demands within the sector. And so what Bahrain uniquely has created now, and again, this is going live second quarter of this year, we've created something that a portal that we've called the Employability Skills Portal. And so the Employability Skills Portal identifies, number one, for the candidates, for talents, the opportunities that are currently available in the market. Number two, forecasts for opportunities that are coming in the future. More importantly, the pay scale that is associated with that sort of opening or opportunity. And that gives them, we think, enough information for them to be able to make an informed decision. So initially, what we're looking at doing is having individuals identify their skills, having individuals identify where the opportunities are, and making sure that the signaling mechanism is right so that people make informed decisions. I hope I answered your question.
Well, you answered all my questions, Ayman. Thank you very much. That was great. I've been told I have got only 5 more minutes. I have two points really to this. Number one, you said, I just want to ask you, what do you mean that for youth to feel safe? Safe of what? Okay, because you repeated the word safe another time. Safe of what, number one?
So I'll give you the perfect example. So the perfect example is, we think the perfect example is the coronavirus and the products of the coronavirus, or the effects of the coronavirus. So number one, as far as change in environments, they feel unsafe because this is a new environment. Working from home for the vast majority of individuals is very different from working within an office that they're used to. Working with technology that they're unaccustomed to at the time gives you also the sense of lack of safety. Number three, you've got an economy, you've got economic changes, seismic changes in economies. So you've got IT companies where their share prices are flourishing, their revenues are flourishing, and so on and so forth. You've got brick and mortar industries that are going through the exact opposite experience. And so there's a lot of movement. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, may you live in interesting times. And the argument was that interesting times are unsafe times. So for the individuals that are very opportunistic, interesting times are fantastic times to live. For individuals that are less so, less opportunistic, and are much more regimental in their work, I would say, the sense of safety is very, very important for the workforce. So that's the sense of safety that we're making reference to.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask my last question. You have been at the Ministry and the High Council of Youth and the government doing, I would say, a good job over the past few years. And focusing on the youth is great. In the past, the Ministry used to focus more on the sports. I'm glad to report that. My question is, what can you do to ensure that this goes to the private sector? The private sector empower the youth, make use of the youth, believe in the youth. What are you doing to do that? I mean, we know that certain large organizations, they have their own commitment, their own values into that. But as you know, in our part of the world, we have many small and medium-sized organizations and entities that really don't have time to think of the youth. They will want to do things themselves. So what sort of empowerment, what sort of engagement you can really push the private sector to give more focus and more belief in what the youth can do?
So I think the answer to that is incentivization more than anything else. I mean, we believe incentivization. We believe that incentive matters. We believe that incentive counts. And so because of that, what we've done was we've created a National Youth Committee. And I'll tell you exactly what this does. So the National Youth Committee identifies 4 corporate partners and institutions, identifies best practices internationally, identifies what other organizations within the same sector, within the same community, within the same jurisdiction has done with regards to the empowerment of youth, whether it refers to apprenticeships, vocational learning, whether it applies to forms of upskilling, reskilling of their current talent, and also with regards to executive training and providing opportunities from that perspective. There's a vast amount of programs that they can adopt internally. Again, key to it, as far as we're concerned, is incentivization. And so what this National Youth Committee is going to be doing is that we're going to be requesting for partnerships with the private sector to see whether we can embed these good practices, best practices, and policies within their organizations. That's number one. Number two, what we want them to do is that we want to gamify it as well. We want to make sure that these organizations sort of compete to ensure that they invest in and promote youth and empower youth. And therefore, we need to ensure that there's a level of recognition that is associated with the investors. I'll give you a very quick example, if I may. In Europe, we see investors in people, and we see the benefits of investors in people. So that has now become an international trademark that is well recognized and well respected. We want to make sure that the organizations wish to compete, voluntarily opt to compete, to be investors in youth, if I will, investors in effectively the future of not only Bahrain, but the international future, all of our future. And so that's really what we're doing. We're developing best practices or documenting best practices and making sure that they have access to the information and they have access to the recognition that we think they deserve if they were to apply this sort of best practice.
Great. I do believe incentivization is a great thing, but maybe I can add to that recognition. Those entities, those organizations who really invest in youth, give them empower youth, train them, develop them, need to be recognized, and that could be really done at the national level. Ayman, thank you very, very much. Really, we had a great start with you. I think you put lots of energy in the remaining session of the day. We have 2 more hours to go. You can stay if you have time to stay. We'd love to get your feedback on our organization. If not, I hope to see you soon, inshallah, when we have some cooperation between the PER initiative and the ministry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the PER initiative. Thank you.
Thank you to His Excellency Ayman Al-Muayyad and our esteemed Chairman Jamal Fakhro for such a really fascinating conversation, looking at bringing in the youth perspective, understanding access to information required, and signaling of information. This is work that we are looking to move forward with the Ministry of, in cooperation with the Ministry of Youth in Bahrain and across the Gulf region. It is my honor to introduce our next session, where we have leading global and regional compliance and business ethics specialists from around the world to discuss impactful development in anti-corruption and integrity practices in the workplace. Leading today's session, we're honored to have Ms. Katya Bechtel with us. Katya is the World Economic Forum's lead on the Partnering Against Corruption initiative. Katya has also co-chaired the Business 20 Integrity and Compliance Task Force in 2021 under the Italian presidency. Thank you, Katya, for joining us in from Europe today. Alongside Katya on this fireside chat are 3 key executives and main players in compliance, anti-corruption, and business ethics and integrity globally and in the Gulf region. I'm honored to welcome Gemma Ayolfi, the head of compliance, corporate governance, and collective action at Basel Institute on Governance based in Europe. She is also the co-chair on the Integrity and Compliance Task Force B20 in Indonesia for 2022, and is a member of the OECD's Steering Committee on Trust in Business. Joining us from the region in Saudi Arabia is Mr. Jalil Ghani, the General Manager of Corporate Ethics and Compliance at STC, Saudi Telecom Company. Under Jalil's leadership, STC developed a new ethics and compliance program focused on elevating the culture of integrity within the company. Jalil was also the deputy chair of the B20 Saudi Arabia Integrity and Compliance Task Force that occurred during 2020. And last but certainly not least, we're honored to have Samer Janoun with us, the Regional Ethics and Compliance Manager for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa, the EMEA region at Meta, or what many of us know as Facebook. Samer has led compliance and ethics for top tech companies, including Meta and Oracle for the region, and we are honored to have you on today's session. And with that, over to you, Katya.
Thank you very much, Rania, for the kind introduction. It's really an honor to moderate this session today. And to start with, really to say congratulations again to the Pearl Initiative for 10 or even now 12 years of really impactful and successful work in the Gulf region. I think you have been really pioneers. I followed your work really from the very start. And the recognition, I think now today goes really also beyond the region. So congratulations again. Well, but let's start with our session, actually on a topic which has been a flagship topic for Pearl like since the very beginning, and that's anti-corruption. Ramya already introduced our panelists. We have 3 excellent panelists, and let's start with the discussion. So let's maybe move to Gemma Ayolfi first from the Basel Institute to give us a bit like of a global perspective on the anti-corruption and integrity field before we dive a bit more into the Gulf region. Gemma, can you tell us a bit like what trends do you see globally in anti-corruption compliance, and what do companies have to get ready for?
Thank you very much, Katya. Good afternoon, everyone. And may I also add my congratulations to the Pearl Initiative. And thank you for this invitation to be part of the celebratory event. And also to support and recognize the opening remarks of the chairman of the board, which were most welcome in that they recognize that collective action is the way for companies in the Gulf to develop sustainable business. To address your question, Katya, over this last decade, I think we've seen significant developments in the corruption landscape, both from a business perspective, but also, and it has to be said, massive corruption scandals. We think of Odebrecht, 1MDB, Unaoil, and so on. So there's still real challenges that remain for companies and governments. But let me mention maybe 4 very quickly, 4 positive, what I think are positive developments. So when we look at anti-corruption compliance and the way that it's evolved, I think what we're seeing now is very much a shift towards driving the ethical culture of an organization. This has been touched on by the earlier speaker in the OECD, transforming as the basis to transform business models, changing the culture of a company, whether it's large or small. I think this is really exciting because it's a shift that expands anti-corruption compliance to include not only the preventive function, which is still very important, as we know, but also combines a proactive model. It's a proactive model that provides an avenue to combine risk, ethics, and compliance. And what we're now seeing is some multinationals have chief risk, ethics, and compliance officers who lead the holistic ethical business model and its implementation. One example of this is what we're seeing is more the intersection between anti-corruption compliance and human rights, for example. Second thing I'd mention is that large companies are putting more anti-corruption compliance efforts into their reviews and due diligence on their third parties. As we know, corruption often involves intermediaries, agents, and third parties. So looking at supply chains, not only for corruption risks though, but also for human rights issues, environmental standards, and so the reach of compliance and becoming a cross-topic place to go is certainly evolving and has evolved over the last 10 years. The third point I think I'd raise and throw in for discussion here is that there is clearly an increased expectation from stakeholders for companies to share more information about their compliance efforts and how they address corruption risks in their operations. One of the biggest investors globally, Norges Bank Investment Management, which looks after the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, has commented publicly, and I quote, "There is still relatively limited public reporting provided by companies on tools, approaches, and metrics used to measure the effectiveness of anti-corruption efforts. For investors like Norges Bank, such information is important to analyze opportunities and risks to investments." And this brings me on to the fourth and last point I'll make here very briefly. Collective action. So the issue of effectiveness of anti-corruption compliance, I think, will continue to gain attention, both of stakeholders and, of course, of boards. We developed a collective action initiative together with a group of companies that was supported by the Norges Bank to develop an initial, a draft set of indicators that really try to identify what is effective, to move beyond the counting of how many people have been trained, how many people have read the policy and signed off on it, but really trying to see what is effective. This is a work in progress, and I think it's an area that many companies will want to get into and maybe look at in a collaborative way. And this is, I think, where collective action can play a role. Collective action, of course, is very diverse, and the Pearl Initiative is a great example of this, as we've just said. And I think that there's many ways that it can develop in the future. So those are just four things that I would highlight at this stage. So thank you very much. Katia, back to you.
Yeah, and thank you, Gemma, for giving this overview. And in terms of like that compliance and ethics, that, you know, we now see more compliance and ethics officers that maybe 10 or 5, even 5 years ago. I think our next panelists are actually a good example, because I think they both have ethics already in their title. So, but without further ado, let's move to Summer Janoon from Meta Facebook. Summer, can you give us a bit more reflections on the developments in the Gulf region? Also based on what you have heard now from Gemma, how do you see that resonate in the Gulf region, in your own company, in your sector? And if you can give us like a concrete example about, you know, the challenges and the complexities you're facing and maybe how you have addressed them, that would also be great. So Summer, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm certainly happy to speak to that. And you know, I think much like many of us have experienced, you know, at multinationals, you already have sort of oftentimes the fundamental principles of a compliance program and the fundamental elements of a compliance program existing, right? And oftentimes you already have a set of robust controls. But as we've seen over the years, that is often not sufficient, particularly when you're in high-risk regions. Companies do still find themselves ending up on the wrong side of the equation sometimes. And so what more can we do? What more should we be doing to navigate these complexities in sort of high risk situations? And what have companies been doing? So I'll talk a little bit about, you know, sort of our current state, but also where we want to go to, and what our future state, desired future state is. And so with that, you know, I think I want to start by talking about values and initiatives. Specifically, some of the things we're doing now to sort of drive compliance, not just you know, within the sort of second line functions and the operational teams, but also on the front lines with the first line functions dealing directly with those risks. And we talk a lot about a concept of culture of compliance. How do we drive that culture of compliance? It's not sufficient to have rules anymore and policies. We want to have a culture where people want to be compliant, where they are, you know, compliance is top of mind in everything they're doing. And the other thing we want to sort of have come with that in conjunction is not only a culture of compliance, but also accountability for it. Accountability for compliance can no longer just sit with sort of the second line functions, with the teams supporting the business, but also with the people that are responsible for managing those risks directly. And first line accountability has been a theme for us and will continue to be a theme for us in everything we're doing. And I'll talk, you know, a little bit more specifically, providing examples of how we do that. But the third concept I just want to quickly mention is having compliance by design. So as we're designing our products and services, as we are designing new programs and initiatives, you know, baking in compliance as a concept into those products, services, and programs, and you know, thinking about proactively how we're going to be able to achieve our vision when it comes to not only compliance, but also, you know, ethics, making sure our values are baked into everything we do. Would it be helpful for me, Katya, to provide maybe a couple of examples of how we do that?
Yeah, that would be great. I think one example already would be fantastic.
Sure. So, I mean, some of the things we do, I think, maybe other companies have been doing and have heard about, and are fairly simple things to do, like we have a week in the year which is dedicated to ethics, and that goes towards the culture of compliance, and we have events that the whole company can participate in and learn more about ethics, and that includes training. We're also having more focused training on specific topics. But one of the programs that I've personally been involved in, I'm very passionate about, is a compliance sort of points of contacts program, which is specifically designed to sort of work with the people that are managing the highest risk programs and the highest risk third parties in the business, and giving them additional training, but also additional responsibility for ensuring compliance is being driven through those first line functions, and being communicated and imparted upon. Our expectations are imparted upon the third parties we work with. So that's a program that I've been sort of involved in for the last couple of years, and I found to be very fruitful, because really without the first line folks out there telling us what's happening, we are not able to see everything in compliance, and rely on the first line functions to be flagging things to us and helping us with monitoring and communication. I think that's the example I'd like to sort of go with.
Thank you very much, Sama. I think the trend really goes to a culture of, you call the culture of compliance, culture of integrity, like really a holistic approach to compliance, basically, which makes links within the company and tries to mainstream integrity and ethics. But let's move to Jalil Ghani from Saudi Telecoms. Jalil, how do you see these developments that Gemma and also Sama have just mentioned in your company, in your sector? Also, it's a very specific one, telecom sector. And what very concrete and practical measures have you taken in your company to adapt and to take path of these developments and also of the risks, of course?
Thank you, Katya, for the question. And I'd just like to echo what everyone said. So congratulations to Pearl for the 10 years, and hopefully there'll be further 10 years in terms of more collective action. Really, to address that, I would just like to talk about what we have done at STC and from a compliance program perspective, because I think, to echo what Gemma has says, compliance, it goes beyond just looking at compliance, because I think the challenge that you always have, if you look at the dictionary definition of compliance, it really is just following the rules. And really now, that is really not the right way to approach this. And what we need to focus on as any organization is look at what is it that we need to do to make or change the culture, to make the change sustainable in the long term. One of the things that we've done at STC is we've focused on really the basics. And what I mean by the basics is really culture, but get in hearts and minds. I think that's really, really important. If culture is to change, it's not just about the mind, which is the compliance part, it's also the heart, which I call the integrity and the ethics part. And really, in order for you to do that, it's really about explaining the why of what is compliance and what is integrity and why is it we're doing it, why now? Because these are all questions that employees have. And in order for this or something like this to be sustainable, it is really important for employees to be part of this journey and for them to understand that. So what we try to move away from is not just focus really on the compliance part, but really for people to understand it's not just about the letter of what the policy is, it's actually understanding what is the intent behind the policy. And a lot of that comes with education and training. So, we launched a program in the middle of the pandemic, which was unprecedented, but, it was driven by the top. It was driven by a leadership team, our CEO, and all of our executives within our organization. And we've done a lot of education through this period. But some of the things that we're looking to do in terms of the longer term, and just to build on, what His Excellency Ayman was talking about, is really the youth, because we are focusing on the leaders, and the leaders are the leaders of today, and they're going to impact the culture. But we're also focusing on the leaders of tomorrow, and that's not the tone in the top, but that's the tone in the middle, because it's those senior managers that are the managers today, but they're the future leaders of our organization. And one of the things that we're actually really doing is focusing on those leaders to really embrace them, get them ready for what is ethics and what is the journey ahead of them, so they really understand really what is the process, what is ethical decision making as part of the process. And then also, just to build on some of the points that His Excellency Ayman was mentioned, is about really the expectation for new employees, because the younger generations now coming into the workforce have a certain expectation of what they think the workplace should be, based on what they have seen and what they have heard. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. And I think it goes, again, I'll quote, His Excellency Hyman was saying, the perception versus reality. And I think, it's really important for organizations as they develop these compliance programs and these ethical programs, is really helping employees at all levels really understand what is the expectation from the organization of what employees should be doing. That's driven by the leadership in terms of creating the tone at the top, but that's also ensuring that you have the right climate of compliance and ethics right across the organization. So hopefully I answered your question.
You did. Thanks very much. I really like that, like changing the hearts and the minds of the employees. That's really nice, and I think that's exactly the right way to go. Also, that employees, young employees, have become a very important stakeholders. They look at what companies are doing. They look for companies with purpose as an employer. So, very important point. Any reflections from the other panelists on what has been said? Otherwise, I would go to my next and final question. Okay, maybe to shift the focus a little bit. We have now heard a lot about what companies are doing internally. So how you are sort of like getting your ethics and compliance mainstreamed within your companies. But as we all know, it takes two to tango. We need the private sector to lead the way to go beyond compliance. But obviously, we also need the public sector, the regulatory side of things. So may I ask you, what are your expectations more towards the public sector, towards regulatory authorities in terms of preventing and fighting corruption? And since we are here at Pearl, and Gemma also mentioned it in the beginning, collective action is so important to also foster the public-private collaboration. So what are your views on that? Regulatory side of anti-corruption, and maybe collective action in terms of supporting and promoting anti-corruption. Who wants to go first? I think, Gemma, you unmuted yourself first, so you go first.
Thanks, Katya. Maybe I'll just get this kicked off. I think that the expectations, I think, from the private sector side towards the public sector side is very often to be engaged in the consultation process when new regulations, new laws, new standards are being developed. And although it sounds obvious in many countries is an automatic process, it's not the case everywhere. And I think if we want to enter into the digital age properly and have one-stop shop portals, e-government, effective rules and regulations that really are effective in not only doing what they're supposed to do, but also work the business, that process of consultation, I think, is key and very, very important. So through a collective action, but through also the so-called normal processes of consultation. Incentives is something we've heard about from His Excellency and also earlier speakers. And I think recognizing a robust approach to an ethical and holistic set of standards within a company or within a sector can be very encouraging to raise standards, to raise the level, to ensure that there's a level playing field and to raise those standards. So incentives and recognition of what companies are trying to achieve, recognition of initiatives like the Pearl Initiative by governments in terms of local certification, local appreciation, can help a lot. It can also improve foreign direct investment, companies looking for partners in a particular country or region. So, all these things that are aimed to make business friendly, but also engaging with business to develop these standards is very important. And not least in the national anti-corruption strategies that are often developed by governments for the whole of society, they really do need to engage with the private sector to make them part of the solution and not leave them out in the cold. Those would be my thoughts on that point. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But sometimes you also need to recognize Jalil and Samar have a day job already, you know, being the ethics compliance managers of a company. And so sometimes this engagement is really, I don't know, it should be, I think, part of the work profile, maybe a bit more, to also make space for that. But Jalil, can I ask for your perspective on that?
Sure. I think, you know, there is a great opportunity there. I think, you know, in terms of, look, I give from an SEC perspective, you know, we've got a large government customer base, and one of the things that we want to do is educate all other organizations, whether it be government or non-government, in terms of our compliance program, our journey. What is it that we have done? Because I think, you know, there is an opportunity for other organizations, whether it be in the kingdom or in the region, to leverage best practice. You know, nobody needs to reinvent the wheel here. And I think that sometimes is a challenge for some of these SME organizations when they want to introduce a compliance program. You know, you go onto these resource guys and there's so much, and they don't really understand as well, how do we prioritize and what are the key important factors? Because as we all know, one size does not fit all, but you need to risk assess in terms of what is relevant for your organization. And part of what we want to do with SCC is really help the organization which we engage with, whether they be suppliers, whether they be customers, whether they partners, is really elevating their compliance program as well, and sharing some of the best practices that we implement within our organization, really to drive that collective action that, you know, that we've talked about here. Because again, you know, as a large company within the kingdom, we have an impact on the supply chain, and we can have an impact within the kingdom as well. So that's part of the process of what we wish to do as an organization.
Samar, over to you. I also see an interesting contribution in the chat about the crowdsourced code of conduct at Novartis. I think that's really speaking about good practices. This is really a very good practice that I can also recommend to look at. But Samar, your expectations, and please, if I can ask you to keep it short, expectations towards the public sector collective action. Over to you.
Yeah, I think honestly, for me, what we need is really straightforward. I mean, I don't think things are very complicated. I think you need really good laws. You know, I think there's countries that have a lot. Some of them are really good, but not everyone has very good laws. And I think you know, we need to kind of partner the public sector to kind of ask for better regulation, better laws. But all of that is really not going to be very effective unless you combine it with enforcement. And there is simply not enough enforcement. I mean, if you look at the fact that the US Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission, between just the two of them, have more enforcement action than all of the regulators in the world combined. I mean, that speaks volumes. And I think the answer is simply more active enforcement, more active regulators, and of course recognizing that the regulators, in order to do that, need the resources to do that. And that all comes from sort of having the political will to provide those resources and support these initiatives. So it's really, you know, making sure that the authorities that are in charge of this have the resources and the sort of remit to be able to have better laws, but also much more active enforcement.
Thanks, Sam. I totally agree. Resources on the public sector side, super important. I'm afraid we have some very interesting questions now also in the chat, and I thank you really for them. Unfortunately, we are already over with our session. Maybe we can continue in another way. Rania, I see, has already put on her video, which means for me that I need to close by thanking our fabulous panelists, Gemma, Samar, and Jalil. Thanks a lot for this interesting discussion. Thanks again to Pearl, and really looking forward to at least 10 more years, hopefully more, of collaboration with you. Thanks a lot, and Rania, back to you.
Thank you so much, Katya, Gemma, Jalil, and Samer. Indeed, there are a lot of questions and conversations coming out of this, and we can go further into any of these topics. But certainly this move, a global move from just anti-corruption and compliance into business ethics and integrity, and integrating this into the corporate values and corporate stewardship is key, first and foremost. We look forward to engaging with all of you in other sessions offline with our esteemed speakers and other organizations as well. And with that, I would like to turn it to our next session, which is a fireside chat with a number of key executives from the Gulf region. We're focusing here on building better businesses, corporate governance essentials for tech companies and small businesses. Here we will be highlighting how good corporate governance practices can help startups and businesses attract investment and funding, expand beyond their borders, or operate in different countries, hiring a remote workforce, and ensuring long-term sustainability for SMEs and startups alike in the region. Leading today's session, the expert in his field, Fahim bin Sultan Al-Qasimi. Fahim is the co-founder and chairperson of Seafood Souk, and a prominent advisor and investor to high-growth companies in the Gulf region and internationally, focusing his advice to startups on importance of government practices. Unfortunately, Fahim has been called away on an urgent matter in the last half an hour and sends his regrets. He will try to join as a panelist. But in that note, I will be moderating today's discussion and fireside chat with key executives of top tech startups in the Gulf region and rising stars. Let's start by first introducing Tia Mervold. Tia is the proud founder and CEO of an award-winning and internationally recognized startup called GetBee. Founded in 2017, GetBee has developed an on-demand platform for all services and knowledge sharing, and an engine that empowers companies, schools, and social enterprises to join the future of work, the sharing economy, and to digitally transform the way people and companies buy and sell online. With a focus on technology for good, Tia and her startup GetBee has been recognized with numerous awards, including being an Expo 2020 Global Innovator, the Cartier Women's Awards, and Inc. Arabia's top female startups. Joining Tia on this panel is Timil Caesar, the group head of ethics and compliance at Careem. Careem, as many of you know, is the ride-sharing and services app in the Gulf region, founded in 2012. And in 2019, Careem was acquired by Uber in the largest ever technology industry transaction in the Middle East. We're honored to have Timil, who will speak about his role in developing and creating really the first dedicated department to business ethics and compliance, pre and post acquisition in Careem. Joining Timil and Tia is Bahet Youssef, the regional senior financial director at Talabat. Talabat is the largest online food ordering company in the Middle East, founded in Kuwait. Since 2016, Talabat is a subsidiary of Delivery Hero, a German publicly listed company which went through its own IPO in 2017. Bahet is steering the business towards achieving maximum profitability while extensive hands-on experience in directing and leading financial, commercial, and operational performance. And last but certainly not least, I'm honored to have Omar Al-Mahiri joining us today. Omar is the co-founder of Letswork and joined as an entrepreneur in residence at Imar, where he launched Letswork in early 2020 with his co-founder Hamza Khan. Letswork has already expanded from the UAE to other countries in the Gulf region and recently acquired a company in Portugal to focus on international expansion. I am honored to have all of the panelists join as we look at why corporate governance fundamentals at an early stage of a startup or a small business is important if you're looking to raise money from investors, expand regionally or internationally, or do business with large companies in government contracts. And with that, we'll just jump right into it because we have a very exciting panel and I know we have limited time. So I think I'll direct my first question, if I may, to Timil from Careem. The question is, we are joined by some of our tech unicorns in the region, other rising superstars, all who have prioritized and been on the ongoing journey of improving corporate governance standards. I'm curious, in your opinion, why should corporate governance be prioritized in the Gulf region by startups and companies alike? And what aspects are important to be considered at first?
Sure. Thank you so much to the Pearl Initiative and to you, Rania, and esteemed panelists and guests for this opportunity and for joining today. It's a privilege to be here with you all. And I think your question is a pertinent one, especially to the startup world. As you shared in my brief bio, I was privileged to be with Careem, both pre and post acquisition. And my team, I would say, was critical in ensuring and essential really in ensuring that the transaction was successfully closed. So I think this perspective may be particularly helpful for those unicorns who are looking to scale and either go public or be sought after as a target for acquisition by a larger firm in this space. As many of you are aware, and as you've shared, Uber acquired Careem for $3.1 billion in January 2020, which was, and I believe still remains, the Middle East's single largest tech acquisition in history. And so in M&A transactions of this scale, there are numerous milestones, but I think there are two particularly relevant dates in terms of the context of corporate governance. There is the deal date, which is essentially the MOU or a letter of intent of sorts, and then there's the closure date, which is the date when the acquisition is actually legally completed, and then the entities essentially become one. So, M&A contracts of this nature are essentially referred to as asset purchase agreements or APAs, and within these agreements, there are generally a lot of legal covenants outlining a slew of conditions that the acquiring company, so Careem in this case, would agree to comply with in order for the acquisition to be actually successful. And this is where a lot of M&A deals and even IPO deals go sour. And of course, while there are a multitude of reasons why an M&A deal can fail or IPOs can fail, from antitrust matters or regulatory or financial concerns, corporate governance is also a principal reason why so many of these deals actually do not end up going through in the end. And this is why I wanted to provide, this is why it's so important to discuss this issue, because it provides a lot of context as to the importance of this matter. And I think investors, by and large, accept that there is a degree of risk in any investment, of course, but all investors seek to hedge or mitigate that risk to the highest extent possible. And this is where corporate governance plays a key role in ensuring, as acting as almost like an informal insurance policy, really guaranteeing that the company's success can be sustained and that it's based on sound operations post-acquisition or IPO. So I know this was a rather long-winded way to get to your questions, but I think it's really important to provide this context and why this conversation is so important and relevant to startups, because we know that in the startup world, everything is about growth, right? Growth trumps all, and corporate governance and compliance can really seem like unnecessary impediments or stale conversational coffee discussion pieces. However, when you look at the end goal, which is acquisition or an IPO, when you consider the end game, that really couldn't be farther from the truth. So tech companies really should begin institutionalizing strong corporate governance and compliance mandates as soon as feasible. And really they should, whether they're seeking acquisition or IPO, this is really an absolute essential. And as for your question of what is the most important to be considered, I would say as a compliance officer, it's important to consider having a compliance professional as a part of the executive team, which is really critical, because you really cannot underestimate the importance of having an independent, neutral arbiter providing an objective perspective of the company in real time as a proactive insurance and assurance function. So I think, irrespective of the industry or phase of maturity a startup is in, the best time to start mandating effective corporate governance is now. It's always better late than never, and certainly it will always pay off.
Thank you so much, Tamal, and very much to your point of having a chief integrity officer was something we were just discussing on our previous session as well, the importance of having a compliance, integrity, and ethics as a key part of your executive team. So perhaps I can turn it over to Omar of Letswork. When you talk about the importance of corporate governance in the stage of maturity, Timely, you mentioned growth trumps all, and Omar, as a relatively new startup, you are already looking to expand into places like Portugal. What, as a new startup, what is your focus? Where did this idea of corporate governance, and specifically, what about it is your focus as you look to expand regionally and now internationally?
So thank you for the question, and thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. I think for us, the main thing that we care about is culture. We're building a team from a team of 2 to now a team of 20. So part of that is how do we maintain a culture that can then result into some formal structure for corporate governance. Right now, we're in the process of closing our first official seed round. And part of that would expand Hamza and I to actually put together some sort of board of directors, which might end up being VCs or perhaps a strategic angel investor. And I think as such a small team right now, we really have to think about, who are we going to bring to basically help us make the right decisions while still maintaining our own internal ethics, our own internal culture. And given the fact that now we have another team that's growing in Portugal, how do we maintain that within each other? So the conversation officially came up in, I think, the summer of this year, where Hamza and I said, we're going to be growing our team to X amount of people. Who are we looking for, and how do we integrate them into the Letswork culture? It's really important because I think we will essentially look at hiring from the top level, who will then help us grow the team further. If these people that we bring in at the top level don't actually have that kind of trust or kind of informed decision-making process that maybe me and Hamza tried to cascade to the rest of the team, then you end up kind of losing a bit of that, which in turn will have a knock-on effect to whoever we bring in as kind of like our board of directors, I'd like to say.
I think it's interesting how corporate governance is also influencing the culture and the type of way that you want to grow and run your business. And I both really for Omar and really to Tia as well, and really for all of our panelists, a lot of tech startups also rely pretty much on a fully remote team. In the case of Tia, I know at GetBee, you have a pretty fully remote team across the world. How do you think about building a team culture remotely and creating a structure so that your product can be used by large companies, whether in the UAE or internationally? And what role has this thinking about governance and accountability played in this?
That's a great question. And I think it's not just a startup challenge, but it's a challenge for everyone now. And especially with COVID-19, everyone had to rethink, what does the office mean? And I think flexibility has become a key sort of expectation that everyone now in this virtual world is expecting. So flexibility can, of course, mean different things. We chose to be fully remote and allow people to work from anywhere. That was a very important value for us because we're truly building a global product, a global software. So if we want global perspectives, we also have to allow for that talent to really be anywhere and to be inspired anywhere as well. So for us, it's been an interesting challenge in how we keep the remote sort of sense of community. And to Omar's point on values is really important to us. So when we hire, right from the very beginning, values is incorporated into our interview process. So for us, it's very much, an alignment on values, and that also allows us to hire and attract the right talent with the right mindset. And going to your question on accountability, I think if you look at that hiring funnel and you think about values and mindset, you can have flexibility if you have accountability. And that is a balance, right? And I think that's often very misunderstood in startups. We think, you can have long lunches on the beach and it's super easy lifestyle, but startups are hard. It's a lot of work. And I think if you have the right mindset, if you have the right talent, you can make great things happen. And again, having that kind of flexibility allows you to hire the best talent too. So for us, it all goes down to values. How we keep that alignment, it's, I think, really important to have that human connection first through technology. That's something that we build through our software and our platform as well. But again, doing little things like sending people flowers on their birthday, it goes a long, long way to have that personal touch in a digital world. So that's something that we try to do, is build community. So our core values are trust and community as well. And how do we build community through the work that we do, but also in how we work.
Human connections and building communities internally and externally is a very key point, and something that I think often comes up with tech companies and tech startups. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Bahet on Talabat's journey, also pre-IPO and post-IPO as part of Delivery Hero. How did these values and areas of governance really enable Talabat to go for or be part of an IPO and get additional investment? And what is the focus going forward? I know with Talabat, we talk a lot about, the regulation is not, advanced enough with the new technologies in this new remote place. And to Tia's point, startups can easily move quickly and work remotely and grow remotely. But how can how do you work with government when, there is no regulation in place?
Hey, Rania, thanks for having me. Good question. In fact, similar to Tom's introduction earlier, when Delivery Hero was looking into the region of a business to acquire, there was probably a few of them in the market. And what made Talabat stand out is the fact that there is a bit of corporate governance there. So it didn't do really like the startup business in the traditional way, but yet they kept a thin line of maintaining the corporate governance. So the company had, let's say, smart contracts with the partners that they work with. They had sort of shaped and formal processes of doing things, and that what made it more easy for them to be acquired and be selected in this part of time. So that was back around in 2015. And 2017, it's the time when Delivery Hero went to IPO. And for that, there was an evolution of this function. So we introduced the GRC function to take care of this, all the government relation and all the processes within the organization, in addition to the internal audit as well. So, and in our case, there was a very recent example when we are working with the government, and it's I think it's a mutual partnership between both sides, and a big part of it lays in the hand of the business to explain, because obviously they call it disruptive industries for a good reason. It's something that didn't exist before. So in our case, for example, we had the cloud kitchen, and the cloud kitchen was a recently introduced concept, worldwide. We didn't have even a trade license that mentioned this type of activity or anything. So it took a bit of effort to explain, but the good thing or the advantage that we see in operating in this region is the fact that the government and the authorities are really supportive, and they are ready to embrace the technology and help and support. So and the cloud concept, if people don't know, it's a concept of taking a common place where you partition and operate multiple brands within. So there are when it comes to the traditional way of doing things, normally this place would be fully under one trade license. So what we had as a challenge is to go and convince the authorities to give us 15 trade licenses to operate from the same place. And obviously, in different emirates, we had different responses, and some emirates were a bit more faster to understand the concept. Some others needed to see if we're operating one, and then they can replicate. And that's the challenge of understanding and explaining and making things happen. So, and being the first usually is the tougher, because like you have to lead the path for the rest of the people to follow.
I think you brought up a really good point, Bahat, where, you know, even on the licensing, they are often not updated with the technology that you're all using. So a question really to all of you, and maybe I can direct this to Tia as well. What is the education when there is no regulation there, and, you know, compliance is not so straightforward, and you're creating new technologies? How are you, you know, how do you present yourself to large companies or governments that you're looking to do business with, to be your clients? How do you bring someone like Tia, for example, Shalhoub Group on board for new investment? And how do you, you know, close that business deal as well? But this question is really to any of you.
Happy to start from a startup perspective, and would love to hear the larger startup perspectives as well. But from our side, I think, you know, we need more discussions, and this region is growing. And that's one of the positives of this region, is that the leadership is open to listen. So I want to start with the first part of your question. And we need more public and private partnerships. We need more discussions between all the different stakeholders. And to Baha's point as well, you know, and with Careem and ride hailing and all of these different industries, technology will continue to disrupt every single industry that we operate in. So, you know, and technology is exponential, it's not linear in that sense. So it's very important that government stakeholders are having these conversations with innovators, with technology, with startups, and really listening to what's happening on the ground. I think having that open mindset, and especially we're very fortunate here in the UAE and in this region that we have such a forward-thinking government and people who are open to listening. And I think that's really what's setting this region apart compared to a lot of other, you know, more heavy compliance governments. And I think that's a really interesting advantage if we leverage that further. It's also very interesting going back to values, because for us, how we've identified our partners and of our, you know, in essence, our clients has also been around values and mindset. So when we align with potential clients or even potential investors, we also make sure that we understand their thesis, you know, what is it that they're looking at? What is it that they're looking at innovating in? And their mindset around values. So for us, around future of work, for example, Shalhoub is very proud of being an employer of choice and creating, you know, a very nice space to work for their employees. Through our technology, they can also create this future of work movement for people on the shop floor, for example. So there was a strong alignment also around values, mission, and vision. So I think really understanding your core values, really understanding, you know, how you can create that alignment and create that collaboration is really key to defining the future, really.
Values is important, and I think this goes a lot to this idea, what I really like at Careem, where you talk about ethics and then compliance. And we're having a lot of questions on, you know, for tech startups, as you're growing, particularly for our mature and large companies, but also for the startups, where is that fine line? How does governance, what discussions are happening? What governance is being put in place when you're looking at compliance, where there is no kind of, it's a gray zone, and then technology, where there's a lot of conversations and heat on the ethics and integrity, things like data privacy and data. Timel, Bahat, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, I would jump in here. Like the idea now, like most of our life is on our phones, and the cloud follows you everywhere. So all your data, all your files, all your photos. So and there's a thin line here, like really between providing a service and introducing to as a personal life. And we also, what happens, for example, with Meta and Facebook, like even the stock, like being really heavily acknowledged by investors at a point of time, just crashed because of simple thing out of this, like on the ethical way of using the data and using it towards benefiting the consumer or the client. So and there's a thin line here, because also all these gig platforms or crowd platform requires like also some certain level of data in order to operate and serve. and in the same time without really getting introduced to the personal life of people. So and here also comes a big role also for the pioneers or the first who operate in the region. So usually by explaining this and the lucky part, as we mentioned earlier, that the people here really listen and understand, and that's what in fact makes a big difference in operation in this region. So there's a thin line always, and the right part is really to serve, and without really getting into an area that you don't need to step in.
Just to add to that, Rania, so I've been in app development for the last 4 years, I'd say, and obviously there's the two big ones, the Android and iOS store. They're constantly updating their compliance and the different types of data restrictions that we as a application or business have. And I think that is kind of a huge shift, and you can see it changing from where it was in 2018 to where it is today. In June, iOS is releasing something where anyone that has an application on iOS can actually ask the business to completely delete their profile and remove everything. Obviously, I think from a business perspective, there's good and bad sides to this, where from the bad side, it completely affects our kind of development pipeline, where we have to reallocate all resources to this constant changing data restriction. And I think hopefully we'll reach a place where it's kind of a holistic understanding that this is good data, this is a bad use of data. But I think in terms of new businesses that are coming in, they're developing new apps, developing new technologies to come into this this marketplace, which, we're already saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this with the data, which maybe other businesses have. So I think as a global trend, you can see everything is changing towards kind of give the user back their data, because it's getting a bit scary nowadays.
If I may, Rania, I think, Omar, you brought up a great point, and Bahao as well. I think, when you're talking about technology and the advancement of technology, it's clear that the regulators at some point or another will get a hold of this, right? And so you have breakthrough precedent-setting technologies proliferating in a multitude of industries. But then what you also see is that at a certain point, whether it's via the industry itself or regulators, compliance comes into the picture. So my posture has always been to plan for that by having effective corporate governance strategies in place. And Rania, you referred to Careem as a sort of a mature organization, and that's absolutely true. With the acquisition, yet we still have very much the tech startup blood, right? With the advent of the super app, we are venturing into new frontiers, Careem Pay, into financial services, into a lot of frontier areas where we have not previously. So we still very much need to take care of these issues, and it's still very top of mind. And how we do that, and especially as a compliance professional, being in an environment that is constantly growing, constantly pushing the threshold, what I'm encouraged by is that there's constant discussion around these topics in leadership, in operation, at the operational level. If you don't make this, governance or compliance a part of the discussion, it's simply going to be left behind. And when the focus again is so much on growth, these topics can seem to be boring or stale or even altogether irrelevant. So my position is always to, when you're keeping it in top of mind, again, it's an insurance policy. You're making sure that you're oh, sorry. I think someone's. Yes, so it's like an insurance policy, really, against all of the changes, all of the updates that happen, be it regulatory or from the industry. And that's really the way that you can assure your company is always relevant and in a position to take advantage of whatever opportunities it may be, financial or otherwise.
It is an interesting conversation. I think you brought up a good point, as really everyone did, that corporate governance is an ongoing journey. Compliance, ethics, developing your HR strategy is really, ongoing, whether you're a startup of 1 or 2 years or have been in the business for about a decade and have been post-IPO or any of this. So I'm curious, what is your advice to a lot of our small business owners and really a lot of startups that are founders that are on the call today in the Gulf region? What would you prioritize in this ongoing journey of corporate governance, and what has it meant for you and your company in terms of growth or sustainability?
I would say the corporate governance is an investment that will pay off. So, and the cost of corporate governance in the beginning is much as a startup, normally you have most of the time limited funds and you need to allocate it into some area, and maybe corporate governance will not come as one of them in the beginning. But the cost of doing a corporate governance proper structure from the beginning is definitely a better thing to invest in. So and it pays off, like, if, as I said, like if you are small and you're growing and you want to get noticed, like one of the key things that investors look at is an area like this. So that would be my advice.
I would jump in and I mean, I wouldn't give advice since we're just new to this, but I would flip the ask maybe. Companies like Talabat, Careem, and even you guys from the Pearl Initiative, I think for us, a knowledge bank of just best practices, things to avoid would be key for us. At Letswork, we're kind of lucky. My co-founder is a qualified lawyer. So a lot of this stuff was taken care of, but at Letswork, obviously we deal with a lot of different startups and SMEs, and constant question about licensing, legality, how to set things up. I think we've had, some great successes in the region, and with initiatives like the Pearl Initiative, I think putting together a knowledge bank that can be accessible to startups like mine or like Thea's would be huge benefit. And that's the education that will make it a lot easier going forward as well.
Yeah. And to Omar's point, I think once you get those foundations right, and to Baha's point as well, it's, the sooner you lay those foundations, the better. But I would also just like to remind earlier startup founders and anyone listening, it really boils down to your values. If you get your values right, that cascades into everything else that you do, be it corporate governance, HR, etc. So getting your core values right from the beginning is the foundation that will then you can build on. And I think, just one last thing that I'd like to leave everyone with is, does this make you proud? And that's often a guiding question that I have, because if it doesn't, that means that something's wrong. So that's also like a moral compass that I like to leave people with as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll just double down or second your excellent point, Tia. I think that is the overarching sort of box you can put all of these compliance governance discussions in, is are you really adding value to the community? So, even if you're doing things legally or in a compliant way, what does that mean to you? And do you understand the impact of your operation has on the community? And if you're doing that in a way that adds value and that ensures that community stakeholders are accounted for, and that your company is not doing anything untoward to your suppliers or to employees or to up and down the supply chain, I think that is really the core. So values is underpins everything, and if you have the right ethical compass where you are really intentional about everything you're doing, then I think governance, ethics, compliance just falls in line as a part of the sort of company DNA, and that this is a natural extension of assuring that your company in the end is a positive actor, positive change agent in society, as opposed to a destructive player, which unfortunately we often see far too much.
Amazing advice and an amazing really call to action to all of you to build this up. And I want to really thank our esteemed executives and panelists for their time and sharing their insights in this ongoing journey. A lot of this is about human connection, and technology is really driven to improve the human connection and improve the connectivity to one another. And grounding that in values is so important when we're looking at governance, working across borders, and using new technologies. I'd like to use this opportunity, thank you again to our esteemed panelists, but I'd like to ask our audience, what, in your opinion, do you believe is the technology trend that could have the greatest impact over the next 2 to 5 years? And one area that we'd want to know more about in terms of government regulation and how startups are handling this. Internet of Things, smart home tech, AR and VR, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and big data. And we'll show the answers to the audience and to our panelists as well, because I think it will be interesting to see how, while technology will always change and regulations will change, it's all about human connections. Thank you again to our esteemed panelists, and looking forward to continue this conversation offline.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. As our audience are answering the question, we'll be sharing the results shortly on the screen. Certainly, thank you again to our panelists. Startups and small businesses have a lot to think about in the short term, but we also know for true growth and sustainability, governance and values must be on the mindset from the beginning. And I am truly honored to welcome our today's last session and an incredibly timely discussion on governance and leadership diversity for the sustainability of family businesses in the Gulf region. I am honored to be joined by female business leaders of the next generation of family firms in the Gulf and Arab world. As many of you know, family firms across the Gulf region have long since been established as the backbone of the economy, comprising 90% of the private sector commercial activity and contributing over 60% of the GDP, the gross domestic product, outside of the oil industry. Yet curiously, studies have shown us that just under 15% of family firms continue to be profitable in their following next generations. And with an imminent generational shift already happening in leadership in the Gulf region and globally, and $1 trillion in assets expected to be passed on to the next generation in just the next decade, regional family businesses are focused on family governance, succession planning, and their sustainability and longevity. With that, I'm honored to introduce Sana Jubaili, who is the 3rd generation family member working for Jubaili Bros, a Lebanese family business established over 40 years ago and a leading provider of energy solutions throughout the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Sana serves as Jubaili Bros Group Human Resources Director, as well as a member of the Board of Directors. And in early 2021, Jubaili Bros appointed their first CEO of the company that is not a family member as part of their succession planning and expansion of diversity at the executive level. Sana, thank you so much for joining us today and leading today's important discussion. Joining Sana in this conversation is Noura Turki, the Vice President of Nesma Holding, a Saudi family conglomerate operating successfully over the last 40 years in a wide range of sectors, including construction, oil and gas, real estate, and hospitality and tourism across Saudi Arabia and the Middle East region. Joining Noura for the conversation is Farida Al-Agami, the General Manager for Tharawat Family Business Forum, an international organization that shines the spotlight on empowering the sustainability, innovation, and growth of family businesses in the Middle East and North Africa region, with a focus on multi-generational transformation of businesses and family ownership as an important factor accounting for companies' continuity and growth. Farida herself is a 2nd generation family business member and owner and serves as a director for her family's firms in Switzerland. Sana, over to you.
Thank you, Rania, for the introduction. And I'm excited to be here today celebrating the Pearl's 10-year anniversary. Now, let's discuss governance in family businesses specifically. Tell me, Noura, what are the challenges of corporate governance in setting up a robust and timely family estate?
Good afternoon, everyone. I would say that the starting point would be a challenge of being proactive rather than reactive. When you're in a family business and depending on your corporate setup, you might not be required by law to go the whole yards and implement the best practices. And actually, these best practices are not a tick the box exercise. They have shown that they really do add value to a business and to its growth and sustainability and preservation. And I think that would be maybe the biggest challenge, is the vision and the commitment to actually implementing the best practices that are out there.
Thank you, Noura. Yeah, I mean, these concepts are also important because, as Rania mentioned, families getting into the third generation and being successful are so limited. So with that, I want to take a step back with Farida, and I want to hear from your perspective, about the whole concept of governance.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me tell you how honored I am to be here today, and I'd like to congratulate Pearl Initiative for reaching this important milestone. It's been a privilege for our organization to be a partner of the Pearl Initiative for a long time now, and it's wonderful to see that these topics of governance, transparency, really have been carried forward so much by your organization. So thank you for all the important work that you do, Rania and your team. Thank you, Sana. Great to be here with you and Noura. It's such a complex question, right? I mean, family businesses, we have to always imagine. I was really, by the way, enjoying the previous session very much. I think there were some real nuggets of wisdom in there, and I was like, oh, wait, I'm trying to take notes of all of them. But yeah, when we add to the complexity that has been discussed before, which is just governing a business, which in itself is complex enough, we now add this dimension of the family. And I've been now working with Tharawat for 13 years, and basically I've spoken to so many family businesses around the region, and we always come down to this question of the human side of governance, which is the hardest part, because we all know the technical part, we can get it down. That's not the problem. The problem is the human side of things. So in order to do that, I like to kind of break it down to the simple, very basic concept of governance, which in my mind is comprised of three elements. Governance in all its facets, in every human context, comes back as the first element being the vision of the governance, or what do we want to achieve, our expectation, right? Whether it's in a team and you need, with that little team, you need to achieve a certain milestone, or whether it's with your family and you want to organize your family business, you need to have that vision and you need to formulate that vision. The second point is the roles. And so we need to know, now we know where we want to go. We need to know who does what. It sounds very simple, but I can assure you it's far harder than we think. And the third part, that's the painful part, is accountability. So now that we know where we want to go, we know who does what, now we have to hold each other accountable. And so when you're in a corporate structure, that probably is feasible, right? You can do that with incentives and appraisals, etc. But I'd like everybody who's not from a family business to imagine that you have to do that with your brothers and sisters, with your uncles and aunts, with your father and mother. How do you do that? And I think to understand why governance is hard for family business, we can look at these three areas. The vision sometimes is missing. Sometimes the roles are not being assigned properly. And even if those two things are functioning, we sometimes fall short on accountability. So those are just my opening remarks. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Farida. And just building on that point with the vision, and I think what Taya mentioned before about the importance of values is, as shareholders, everybody has to be on the same page. And like Rania mentioned, we recently brought in an outside CEO, a non-family member CEO, because there was the willingness and the commitment of everyone involved to continue to drive this organization to the next level, even if we had to give up and compromise on all levels, whether family members working in the business or the founders sitting at the board, bringing someone in to steer the ship. But that change and that diversity is difficult. And I'd like to hear from Noura, What does diversity look like for a family business? And what are some of governance strategies that can ensure diversity in leadership?
I love hearing the theory, the academic side, the practical side in this conversation, because it really is somewhere amongst all of that. And in our case, you know, I'm bringing in the practical experience, the actual like running on the ground. When I joined our family business, my father, who was the founder, was the chairman and president, and the transition happened while I was around there in 2018. And so, you know, the succession and the challenges that we see are emerging as we go through. So I would say that the challenges when it comes to diversity, first of all, this word now is always associated with woman, you know, bringing gender into the picture, but it's actually so much more than that. So Sana, you said for your family business, you brought in professional management. In the case of Nesma, we've always had professional management and a structure around growing the businesses with operating CEOs. What's interesting now in terms of bringing in that diversity under the framework of corporate governance is bringing in independence. And actually, that's been a challenge for our family to find people who we actually consider independent. Because when you're, you know, when you're a family business and you've got lots of connections and networks and people who might not be related to you by blood are still, you know, your father's friends or your cousin's friends, or, you know, and you wonder, is the independence going to be compromised? So it's an interesting exercise, and it's actually well worth it. It's the diversity of thought, of opinion, of experience, and bringing all of that together at the board level to better benefit the outcomes of your business. And we are right now embarking on that journey, and I'm finding it to be so important and so valuable, and with very concrete results, that, you know, maybe people, if they were thinking about corporate governance as like compliance in terms of compliance with best practices or compliance with rules and regulations, would think of this as a tedious exercise. But actually it reminded me that, for example, if you're a member of the family, you have these three roles, right? You can be a shareholder, you can be on the board, and then you can be in management. And in my case, I'm all three, but each one has a different role to play. And I think in family businesses, you can kind of forget the importance of having shareholders and board members as separate functions. And so I think that bringing that diversity into the boardroom is what's key. Age, gender, experience, family, non-family, and the whole range of diversity within that.
If I can just maybe jump in here, Sana, because I think what you were saying, Noura, is so true. And what I feel sometimes helps families who maybe don't have your approach is to reflect, why do we want diversity? Because, you know, I think we have to be a bit careful. There are some of these buzzwords that are, you know, being carried around, and somehow everybody wants to be part of it, but we don't really know why. And I think having that vision behind our actions is really the only way governance can actually become the tool that it should become. And you know, like one of the speakers before said, you know, governance is an investment. And yes, it will pay off, but I think it will only pay off if it's done with the right reasons. And I think we just need to acknowledge that diversity in the 21st century, diversity of leadership, is essential to tackle the complexity of the problems we're facing, right? The speed of change has increased. The amount of data we have to access to take one decision is huge, is exponentially growing every single day. We have stakeholders that we didn't have even 10 years ago. And we now see the connectiveness that we have through COVID across the globe that we can't even imagine how one, I mean, it's the butterfly effect to a certain extent, you know, personified. So I think, you know, building on what you said, it really helps when enterprises and business owners reflect on the why before the how, because that will really guide us when we have a problem down the line.
Absolutely. And in our case, the why comes from where we are in our journey. So the first 40 years were all about growth.
Yeah.
And the growth was so exponential because we had an entrepreneurial founder who was in all the different sectors and was exploring all the opportunities, and in many cases went into new businesses out of a gut feeling and without the, you know, the due diligence and the business case studies and all of that. And I think reaching the 40-year milestone, along with the transition to the second generation, made us realize that, with the founding, with our founders' support, with my father's support, that actually this is the right time for us to start looking at our internal controls and to start looking at, defining our risk appetite and all the terms that we've been talking about in this conference all day, all the stuff that goes under corporate governance, whether it's internal audit, whether it's compliance, whether it's ethics, whether it's risk. And I think we've had all of those things, but to really make the effort to bring them all together and make them putting them in a framework, and recognizing that framework begins with preparing proper boards that can be forward-looking, not only looking backwards at your financial results. And diversity is really important for that, especially when we're a diverse company. We're in so many different sectors, so we need the diversity in terms of people as well.
Definitely, and I think a lot of family businesses can relate to what you're saying, Noura, about how before the founders relied on their gut feeling, but now if any of the family members want to go open somewhere, you need a whole list and a detailed studied about how this is going to 5-year plan. Well, what's interesting though is about bringing diversity, like you said, it's not always going to be easy because some family members will feel that there might not be the independence there. But I'm sure that there's both the benefits and the risks of bringing in non-family members. And I want to hear from Farida how you think, is there potential for these non-family consultants to support conflict resolutions within and between family business members?
Well, I mean, it's a very specific question, right? Because we're diving right into the heart of where family conversations happen. And I think, I mean, I'd love to hear Noura's take on this, but I've seen scenarios where you need someone that all the family can trust, and that trust needs to be built over time. So I have seen advisors who've been with a family for a very long time that were successful in mediating conflict because they kind of had maybe lacked that independence that you were looking for, Noura, in your previous comment, but they had the DNA of the family down to a T. They knew each member, they knew what their interests were, and that was the reason why they were able to move. What I've seen less of in the region is mediators, very professional mediators who basically just come in for one conflict, which typically then become lawyers. And when you involve lawyers, it becomes kind of, confrontational, and it becomes kind of a party situation. So I would say it's a very difficult thing to have independent non-family members that just kind of come in from the outside and try to fix a family issue. And I'd like to invite everyone who's not in a family business to think of that in their own family. You have this prolonged conflict with your cousin, you don't talk to each other. Imagine just having someone from outside who's never spoken to anyone fly in, sit in your living room and tell you now you guys have to get along. Like, that's a very complex process, right? So I think we shouldn't underestimate that there are easy spaces to have independence and diversity, and there are difficult spaces to have independence and diversity. And I think we have to just be honest about that.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience so far, what I'm noticing is that the independents aren't coming in to fix the problems, because we know the problems more than they do, right? They're new. Exactly. But they're there to ask the questions that maybe because of the family dynamics, we won't ask.
Yes.
Especially in our part of the world, when there's such a deference and a respect for hierarchy and the elders and the authority and all of that, maybe people have questions in their mind that they're thinking about, but will I ever ask this question out loud? No way. So when you bring in an independent who asks that question, then it's there on the table. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, the challenges you were saying about the family business is that this is a challenge, but it's also what makes this place so beautiful, is that all our operating CEOs, a lot of them are founding operating CEOs. They've been with us forever. And so, it's very difficult for us to ask someone to leave or for them to even consider leaving. And this question about succession planning, which is so critical, right, to any business and to longevity and to, sustainability, is a question that's very difficult to have. It's a conversation that's very difficult to have. And when you bring in independents who are specialized in corporate governance or who are here and mandated to help you, they have to ask that question. Because if they don't, they're not doing their job. And it just diffuses it a little bit, because, you know, if someone from the family is asking it, maybe we're implying that it's time for someone to leave. But that's not what we mean, right? We're just talking about one of the business issues that we need to talk about. We're not actually saying, please, you know, you have 1 year left. No, it's just something that we need to consider. And so when an independent asks it, not the family member, then it makes the conversation easier, I think, to have.
Maybe Sana, just if I may, I think follow up on this, because I think you made a very, very important point. And I think we need to be very careful to distinguish between, let's say, family conflict and governance needs, like corporate governance needs, because obviously they should happen ideally in slightly different spaces. And I think we're all aware that at the moment, you know, one of a conglomerate that actually has very strong governance, you know, still has on the family side has an issue that we did not expect as a public, you know, as people who didn't know the details. We did not expect the family conflict to happen, even though the business is very well organized. So, you know, I fully take that on board, what you're saying, Noura. And I think the question of asking questions is absolutely very, very crucial. So you need, when you look at independent people to join your family business, I think you need to look for that capability of spotting those points, asking them in a way that the family can digest, and then supporting the family to positively address that question. I think that would be your ideal candidate for someone who sits with family members.
I think it's interesting, Farida. I think you're bringing up a point where we have corporate governance, and then we have specifically the family governance. And, you know, for example, putting in a family constitution, how do we resolve conflicts, whether we're open to mediators or not? If we set those levers in ahead of time so that when we get there, we might not avoid it, but it helps with those conflicts.
Absolutely. No, I think that's why I think thinking in spaces really helps in family business, because everything is so complexly linked to each other. I feel that sometimes you have to dissect, like, where does the problem lie? Is it a family issue? Is it an ownership issue? Is it a corporate governance issue? And then solve those problems in those spaces that are defined for it, that are, you know, there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it depends a lot on the specifics of the family business in terms of how big the family is, what generation you're in, how old is the next generation. So, you know, I come from a family business on both sides. And on one side, it's the second generation, the founder moved on to a government role, is currently there as a shareholder, advising the second generation. It's very clean, very neat, you know. In his exit, he started seeing the forest for the trees, started guiding from the outside, there facilitating any transition issues. And then the next generation is way young, so, you know, you don't have too much to deal with any of these issues. And on the other side, you know, we're in the third generation, like 8 siblings, you know, each sibling has 4 kids, you know, there's a lot more, there's so many more generations, there's so much more. And in that area, I'm seeing fantastic progress now in the establishment of a next generation committee. You know, and that's one way of getting the next generation understanding the business, coming into it, and then using the structures that are available within corporate governance to structure the conversation. So you agree beforehand. What are the decisions we're allowed to make? What are, you know, how do we vote? You know, that's not how you talk when you're sitting in your living room. But when you organize a committee and you say, this is your charter and this is your mandate and this is how we organize things, it creates that structure of, okay, this is how we're going to make sure that we, you know, think about this as, yes, we're a family, but also bring the business side into the conversation. So there are some really good practices, and it really depends on, right, what you need in terms of your size and your setup and your scope.
And Farida, have you seen in your experience that it's the next geners? Can they bring in some structure, and can they learn about governance and come to their fathers and say, hey, we should be doing this? Or does it really have to come from the older generation to bring in that structure and those guidelines? Because I know there's going to be a lot of people here, you know, they're new into their family business, or they're the next gen, and they feel limited about their ability to make change. From your experience, what have you seen?
Well, look, I mean, I've seen a couple of 100 family businesses over the last decade. And I would say that in a way, I've seen all of these and I've seen none of them, because they're all so different, right? Every family has different family dynamics. And that makes it so difficult to give you a conclusive answer to this question. But I would say that if I were to kind of generalize, we have quite a unique situation especially in the Gulf, I would say, because this generation of next gens have almost exclusively been educated, very highly educated, have been exposed to, you know, international best practice, come back to the family business with that in mind. And then one of two things happens. And that's kind of, I think, one of the observations I've made. One of two things happens. Either we come out with huge frustration because nothing they bring in really takes, and the older generation perhaps cannot understand, you know, why this is so important to this person, you know, because they haven't maybe spent a lot of time together in these 10 years of educational process. Or then they actually bring that to the table and it is being seen as an opportunity. And that's when they bring in change. But I would say that I can't give you percentages because it's very difficult, but I definitely see quite a high percentage of frustration. Because there is not always that dialogue. But what I have seen is that it invariably depends on the family culture that precedes the business. If you have a family culture that allows you to have, you know, constructive debates and constructive dialogue in your family, then those questions can be tackled. You might not always have a win, but you definitely have a platform to express yourself, and you have a culture that has taught you to express yourself. The families where I see it going really difficult is families that also, from their, you know, nuclear culture, don't have this vocabulary of exchange. And I think that's where it sometimes goes wrong. And beautiful companies are really under a lot of pressure because of how you speak to each other over dinner. Imagine, like, the link is direct in my mind.
Great. Well, thank you, Noura and Farida, for sharing your experiences and your perspectives on this important topic. I believe together, and with organizations like the Pearl Initiative and their tenacious efforts in fostering accountability and transparency in the private sector across the Gulf, we will implement better corporate governance that will allow us to thrive and benefit the business community. Rania, back to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to Sana, Farida, Noura for really fascinating discussion, a mix of the academic and the practical, and the reminder that family governance can look different in many ways from corporate governance, and there's other unique challenges there in implementing, you know, best business practices and more than just ticking the box. So really, thank you so much for sharing the ongoing journey with all of your companies and what you have seen in the field, because this is, again, an ongoing journey and discussion amongst family business owners around the world and in the Gulf region. And this brings us to the conclusion of our virtual forum. I want to thank our excellencies, our 15 distinguished speakers, and most importantly, our esteemed and honorable guests and audience that have been engaging with us virtually in the last couple of hours, but also engaged with us in our activities over the last decade or so. We are really looking forward to working with many of you going forward in this year and next. The Pearl Initiative's For Business by Business model promotes sustainable economic growth by disseminating corporate governance best practices in the Gulf region. We use our extensive network of all of you, of our partners, both corporate, program, strategic partners, networking partners, to help facilitate practical research in the Gulf region, host convenings, trainings, and workshops similar to today's open forum, and to support regional businesses as they maintain resilience and stability, and in turn, foster innovation and economic growth. I encourage you to reach out and join the movement, participate in our upcoming programs and activities, and reach out to see ways that we can partner and work together to continue to promote corporate governance practices. You can reach us through our website, email, LinkedIn, our social media channels that are listed here. And we encourage you also to take the short survey to provide feedback on not just this forum, but what you would like to see going forward. Until then, please stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you very much.